Okay, welcome to the meeting of the Implementation Advisory Subcommittee on in-kind donations. I actually don't think we do need a motion. I think we just need a roll call, but we need like an affirmative roll call from you all. So, calling the meeting to order, doing the roll call, Becca
Here.
and James.
Here.
Okay. And for the sake of the recording, just letting folks know that we are waiting for one more member to join, but we do technically have quorum now. And so, James and Becca, if you want to proceed, apologies for the interruption. I know you're we're looking to have a conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think we're definitely going to wait to see for the rest of the committee before we make any, or subcommittee before we make any decisions or anything, but just trying to get a sense of, now that Becca and I both have had a chance to look at this, kind of what Becca's thinking.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think, what am I thinking as it relates to in-kinds specifically? I have lots of thoughts. I still, the two things in my head are kind of encouraging participation, equitable access to the system as like a, foundational value, and then also consistency, clarity, ease of compliance, and accessibility in terms of how to participate. And so to that end, I'm looking at the state's definition of in-kind versus the city's small donor elections version of in-kind. And I don't know if I lean one way or the other on a policy end. The thing that concerns me about aligning with the city of Portland is that it is a moving target and can be adjusted, not wholesale, but certainly like the threshold and the interpretation of what qualifies as democracy building activity can be changed by a vote of the Elections Commission. And so that's my hesitation around oh yeah, let's line up with the city of Portland when in 2 years, if the commission feels like they want to increase their threshold or do things differently in the in-kind, then we will not be aligned. And the thing that I'm thinking in terms of if we were to align with the state's definition is it's not apples to apples, meaning if local races were to pick up the definition, to be aligned with the limits for ledge candidates, because I think that's what the 12-month that you have in here, that's for ledge candidates, not statewide, right? Because I think there are different thresholds.
It's 3 years from state.
Yeah.
It's both 12 months for both offices, but it's actually 36 months. House and Senate are the same. Statewide candidates have 36 months.
Yeah, so the House and Senate, so we would most likely be aligning with whatever definitions, limitations, local races would be the equivalent to state ledge races, right? So it'd be this 12 months. So I just, for clarity purposes, because I think in the chart you say 12 months for statewide, but it's 12 months for 12 months for House and Senate, 36 for statewide. I was saying something. Oh, the apples to apples. So the state statute, the 12 months equivalent is irregardless of participating in, a voter-owned election. And so if we were to do that, we would just have to be very intentional, either if the state wanted to preempt, or if we included this in a charter amendment referral, that this is only allowable to folks who enter in and qualify for the, funded, the publicly owned elections program, that it's not just any candidate can access it. So that's like, how would you write that carve out policy for the city of Portland and Multnomah County? Because if, for example, you're running for, I don't know, the city council in Phoenix, if local candidates had this in kind, any candidate could qualify for the in kind limit if you didn't have a small donor elections. Does that all make sense?
I don't think I followed all of that. I guess in my mind, so I mean, first of all, with the reference to Phoenix, I think most places in the country don't really differentiate between in-kind contributions and contributions. Like money is money, basically. Whether the organization is supporting a candidate by paying their own staff or they're giving the candidate money to purchase staff, like it's kind of all treated the same in most places, is my understanding. And Daniel did include the handful of places that actually do differentiate, and it looked like, you know, for the most part, it's like on par. I mean, even if they do call out in-kind contributions separately, it's basically treated as like similar levels to the contribution limits. But aside from that, to your other point, I guess, you know, I would want to be kind of, you know, to the greatest extent possible, you know, changing like as little as possible about you know, something that was adopted by a huge percentage of Multnomah County voters. And so, you know, if we did all kind of come to agreement that a charter change was the right way to go, I would imagine that it would kind of change the Multnomah County charter to be more similar to the city of Portland's charter, where it basically says, you know, that, or, you know, also allowable are any contributions that are allowable under a small donor election, under the small donor elections program, which would mean, you know, it would only affect kind of participating candidates while leaving the existing limits in place for non-participating candidates. Hey, Felisa.
Hi, guys.
Are you in the great state capital?
I'm always in the great state capital.
Hey, please, just so you know that we are recording this meeting too.
Yeah, Google told me.
Great. Okay, perfect. And so, yeah, we were reviewing the chart of the campaign finance laws. And then, you know, I think Becca and James were giving our reactions to it and talking about the, you know, value of consistency and but adaptability for like the uniqueness of Multnomah County races too.
Daniel, do you know?
No, go ahead, Becca.
I was just going to say, it would be helpful if we added a column to this chart, which is like, what are the things being considered in all of these realms? Because I think we talked about this, where whatever we decide on in kind is influence and, you know, connected to whatever the limits subcommittee is, the conversations that they're having.
Okay.
And that way we can even if it's just like, you know, current discussion is this, you know, it's obviously not binding, but I think it would be helpful to see it all, how it all intersects.
Sure. I can add that column, but in the meantime, I can just tell you that the limits subcommittee is not interested right now in lower contribution limits than you know, what is in the Multnomah County charter. And so I think they're in a similar place to you all, and that like if the charter amendment, if the charter doesn't change at all, they're not interested in like providing lower, you know, lowering limits at all. So I think they're still looking at the 603 number. But of course, like the caveat being that, you know, those conversations can develop and change. And of course, it's just a subcommittee, the full IAC will have its own voice in the process too.
Are they having similar conversations and looking at like what the state statute is, what 4024 is on limits and what small donor elections are on limits? And are they looking to align with one or the other?
They've looked at both, looked at 4024, and we looked at the limits under small donor election, as well as the contribution limits under other municipalities too. I don't think they've actually landed quite yet on whether or not they want to stick to the state's definition or, set their own definition, assuming there's an amendment. I don't think they're quite there yet, but I think I will say they probably have they've ruled out, I think, lower limits than the 603.
That's surprising.
Yeah. And of course, there's like much more discussion we had too.
But not, just for clarity, they haven't ruled out lower limits in a small donor elections program, I say with a question mark, right? Like, as we build it, I'm assuming they're looking at, are they not looking, because obviously the city of Portland has smaller limits, right? So
Every
are you saying
program.
they've ruled out, right, smaller limits entirely, or just in the context of nothing changed to the charter?
I think what they're saying is even the small donor elections, or even like a small donor program that Multnomah County sets up, they would still want the limits to be around 603. And so, if the state preempted this, or if the Multnomah County charter changed, then I think they would be interested in exploring a different contribution limit. But right now, they're looking at 603 for the participants who, in the Multnomah County program too. I think, let's, I do want to make sure we're using our time here to focus on in-kind limits. Of course, happy to answer questions about other subcommittees too. But I think the other thing I want to draw your eye to is the spreadsheet I shared of all the in-kind contributions made in the 2024 city races. And this was requested from last meeting too. I went through and highlighted anytime there was a donation, or the aggregate donation exceeded $5,000, because the limit for people who run under the city small donor program is $10,000 in-kind contributions. And so that's the limit, is 10K. So I highlighted anyone who goes above 5K, pretty rare. Not a lot of people who spend over 5K, or a lot of organizations, I should say, who spend over 5K. And I think the number one reason for that is just that the program was very challenging to navigate for community-based organizations trying to figure out how to give in-kind donations. Because the rules that the city had for in-kind donations were like one of the most universal pieces of the feedback the program got was that they were very complicated and very difficult to navigate. And so I think a lot of organizations just decided to forego it entirely and maybe reserve their spending for independent expenditures or for something else. But that's why we don't see a lot of in-kind donations above, above 5K in the 2024 city races.
Well, and this is because it doesn't have on here the in-kinds specific to a candidate. So the ones you highlighted were not just aggregate of what an organization in-kinded, but the aggregate of what they in-kinded to a singular candidate.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'll just show you real quickly, just again, we make a practice of, trying to keep the donations focused on the numbers instead of the name. But as you can see in column C, we have it broken down by candidate too. So it's sorted by like, the candidate and then the organization that made the donation too. So you see Carmen for Portland here. And like, for a mayoral race, for a mayoral campaign like Carmen Rubio's, there's just not a lot of in-kind donations, which is rare. Usually mayoral campaigns attract, larger in-kind donations too. But you can go all the way down and you can see all the other candidates. I'm going to hide it again, but I think that was just, I wanted to explain that we do have that information available.
That's helpful. I did not see that
Yeah.
one. I also find it interesting that democracy building activities include paid advertising? Because it looks like one organization in-kinded $10,000 worth of paid ads. And that was not my understanding of the interpretation of democracy building activities. So anyway,
I
that's,
agree.
It's not,
It's
yeah,
not. Nobody
Yeah.
filed a complaint.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, the democracy building activities definitely does not include paid ads. So I think you might see some numbers here, and like those numbers don't necessarily reflect like violations or like whether the candidate refunded the donation. And unfortunately, because like of limits on the reporting software, they're just, and especially to Orstar, there's
Yeah.
only so much information that like downloads into these spreadsheets. And so I'm not saying the 10K was, you know, within the DBA rules, but that's just what that organization gave to that candidate.
Can I say something quickly? Because it's going to lose my brain. It has nothing, well, it's related to in-kinds, but you just said Orstar, which is, you know, been the bane of my existence and also very helpful. Is the oversight committee having conversations around what a reporting system could look like and like making sure it aligns with the Orstar rebuild?
That is actually one of the things that the full IAC takes on, not the oversight subcommittee. And it's also something that within the county, you know, we're exploring like what budget we do have available for it, like, you know, what a vendor contract could look like, how quickly could we move that along to. So like the plan is to build a reporting software because the programs like these have to review each donation that, you know, to make sure that it qualifies. So that's why we can't really rely on Orstar for that.
I super appreciate the fact that you'll have to see and make sure that they qualify. I'm hoping that there can be alignment between the city, the county, and the state on the input piece, meaning that if you're a candidate or an organization doing work in Multnomah County, you have to report now to the state or star system. And so anyway, I'm just
Yeah, noted. And I do have like comments on that, but yeah, I know that we only have so much time here too. But I appreciate the question.
So can I'm just putting my phone down because I don't want to hold it. But what is our what are the things that we needed to decide in this meeting? You probably said that at the beginning and I was late, so sorry to make you repeat.
Yeah, I mean, I actually haven't said it up front. But so the goal of this meeting is what was requested last time, which was to review the data of state and city laws and county laws. And then the in-kind donation information that was requested. And then to use that to evaluate whether or not an in-kind donation policy could look like, you know, if there was a charter change. So if you all, or like if there was preemption by the state, for instance. So I think like last time you all wanted to talk about that specifically. And so we're making time on this agenda to do it too. So like, do you all, you know, do you think like the in-kind donation rules for the state are what the county would ideally adopt, or for the program would ideally adopt, or the city's program, or like creating our own rules? And that's like the central question for the meeting.
I feel like that I've been pretty clear that I think the statewide rules are the best. So they're not fully spelled out in here, I think. Because it says membership orgs can give up to 12 months full-time staff equivalent to 36 months for a statewide candidate for limited activities, but it doesn't explain the rest of the bill. So
Yes.
for our purposes, like I think, yeah, but I'm fine with the state.
Yeah, and I should have said this up front, but I also like was synthesizing information, so I didn't include like donation limits to caucus committees because we don't have those at the county. So I tried to synthesize these, but if people want me to like go into greater depth about something, you're welcome to ask me to do that. But yeah, these are the. Why don't we start with because one of the conversations is like, do we want it to align with the state? Since you all have like some core piece of information about the state, what are folks' reactions to the state law Are there places that you think it could be stronger, or places that you think it would fit really well from Multnomah County candidates?
I have a
Or
quick
go
question.
ahead,
Does the
Becky.
state law allow individuals to in kind? Or is it only membership organizations? I can't remember.
Individuals are allowed to in kind some
Up to the
things.
limit.
I think that's right.
And
I mean,
But
the individuals are
but some
definitely
individuals
exempted.
are excluded. Yes, some individuals are excluded, and some FTE are also, some types of FTE are also excluded. So you can't like in kind a pollster, or you can't
Yeah.
in kind like a consultant.
and I do believe SD small donor committees can also in kind as well.
Yes, it's membership organizations and small donor committees. It's a lot of overlap there, is my guess.
And just for clarity, just to follow up on that too, the city has in-kind donation rules for individuals and for organizations. And the individuals can give in-kind donations, but it's the same level as the contribution limit, 350.
Only-
But
Only within the small donor program, not for a candidate that hasn't qualified.
right. And so other reactions to the state's rules, and I think like we're just trying to take this piecemeal, like, in a linear fashion. So like, what do we think about the state, and then what do we think about the city, just to kind of get everyone, on the same page about where we are. So other reactions to the state rules, what could be better, or what do we think it would work for Multnomah County public financing candidates?
Well, I mean, I think everybody who was involved in crafting the state law stuff, accepted like a lot of compromises. So, I mean, there's plenty of things that I think could be different about the state rules, but specific to the, their applicability here for Multnomah County participating candidates, I continue to think that like 12 months equivalent salary is like really, really high, basically, for races that, have historically been less expensive.
And I'll just restate in terms of my reaction to the state. I said before Felicia hopped on, which is I'm struggling with the intersection of if the state preempts and says all local candidates equal ledge candidates, and you can in kind up to 12 months of FTE. For Multnomah County, we would only be interpreting that as limited to only this folks who were in small donor. I say with a question mark, right? That's the assumption that it's not.
I think,
but for other,
I think you're asking there's two separate pieces to what you're asking. The state has two choices. The first choice is just to preempt Multnomah County, period. And that then you're not talking about in small donors. That's preemption. You can't do something different. That is preemption, period. The second option is the state, which was agreed upon last legislative session, that the in-kind limits would apply to local government candidate. That was agreed upon last session. It was a technical fix that is going to be part of the technical fixes for this session. That is going to happen. The question about that then is, so for all other local candidates outside of Multnomah County, they will fall under the 12 months equivalent. So what we would be deciding is to do something different than what the state is doing. Does that answer your question?
it does. And when the state makes that technical fix, it still allows us as Multnomah County to say, great, thank you, but we are only allowing the in-kind to apply to small donor candidates and not everybody else.
It
We
allows you to
could-
set lower limits than the state.
Okay.
Because you have because Multnomah County and the city of Portland are grandfathered in.
One question I had for people is, if we went with the state's definition, small donor committees can give 5 times the number of, or like basically $5 for every member it has for ledge candidates and, $10 for statewide candidates. If we adopted that here in Multnomah County, would it be like the number of Multnomah County members that the organization has?
The small donor committee language is completed. It's done. That is actually preempted by the state. So I'm just waiting for the legal opinion from LC that we can actually share that will tell you that. So that conversation is not finished. You're preempted.
Okay.
You're preempted there.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so it would like rely on the number of statewide members it has. Yeah, okay, thank you.
And regardless,
anyway.
that doesn't impact the in-kinds, right? I mean, in membership organizations, small donor can in-kind, but it doesn't, the limits on that doesn't matter what this small donor limits
No,
are.
because
Because it's
our
the
membership
FTE.
organization is wildly different than a small donor committee.
Speaking of the state rules, and we're just asking for people's reactions here. As Felisa was saying before, certain FTEs can be donated to candidates, and then certain FTEs cannot, like pollsters, campaign consultants. They can't be donated, I believe, if they were, either they're currently employed as one or they have been employed in the last 18 months preceding the election.
Mm-hmm.
If like the county went with something like that, do people like that division? Do people like that division where like the FTEs that can be donated can only be donated if they're, around, like community outreach, community engagement?
I like the approach kind of that the city has taken on that. I mean, differentiating like democracy building, activities. I mean, not to include like attorneys or whatever, pollsters or stuff, and instead just kind of like focused on, direct voter outreach stuff. I feel like that's the right approach for areas that were allowing kind of larger contributions.
Felisa?
I mean, we just looked at a spreadsheet where the city that's not accurate. So I feel like.
Wait, sorry, what do you mean?
I mean, looking at Daniel's spreadsheet, they're in-kinding a bunch of stuff that don't fall under democracy building activities. Like when I look at that spreadsheet, there's a whole list of things that are not defined as democracy building activities that you just mentioned that are actually much clearer in the state law about what is included and what's excluded.
And
Like for example, under the state law, you can't in-kind that level of paid communications. That's clear. That's why it's a FTE based and not dollar based. And yet you look at the city of Portland and it says democracy building activities and it's got a bunch of paid communications. That's what Becca just pointed out.
Right, totally. And then I thought you kind of responded to that to say, right, that there's been complaints about that. So I totally
didn't.
agree.
I'm sorry. I said the exact opposite. I said there were no complaints. So no complaints were filed about that. And so it's done. The in-kind is done. And then tracking in filing a complaint, if you did the paid communications, like you would have to do it in a timely manner, and the filing doesn't. I mean, I get how you like the city idea in theory. Yeah, so the city idea in theory is great. Apparently nobody gives a shit about it except for I feel like a fool right now. Hope this meeting is being recorded because my ass obeyed the law like a dumbass apparently.
It's being recorded for sure. Yeah.
I also feel like having participated in like a recent forum that the Secretary of State convened people around rulemaking of 4024, that conversation was the in-kind is very similar to the at least approach of the city, which is democracy building activities. I mean, that the whole conversation was, was for folks doing direct voter contact or things that support direct voter contact, like database maintenance, right? So I feel like they're not different. And in fact, the state feels more clear. But regardless, I feel like our approach should be democracy building, voter engagement, voter contact, and the things that like admin and data entry that support that. So however we define it, that's what I would want to focus on. And I can't, I mean, it doesn't say in here.
As well.
Yeah. Do you, just as an amendment here, Daniel, could you, and I can do it too in 4024, I feel like there was explicit language around it. Yes, it's tied to FTE, but it was clear on in the statute about what kinds of work they could do. Well, I can go
yeah,
back.
I thought we did include that here about like what exactly specific kinds of work they can do. I had to pull the
And then
exact
it-
language again.
And then
Okay.
it also sets some clarity. It sets a lot of clarity. So like they can do the in-kind up to 12 months per year for a full-time equivalent for the Office of State Representative. Let's just say we're going to stick with the Office of State Representative, even though it's significantly smaller than the county offices. They must, it talks about how they must measure them. So that's the 18 months. And it makes the organization must be solely responsible for the pay and benefits and the employment status. So it really does like tighten down the in-kind, and then direct voter contact and staff support for the purposes of this section, where the Secretary of State will define and rule community organizing, community or outreach, direct voter contact, and staff support for the purposes of.
So I like that the clarity in the definition for sure. I mean, and those are the right, I feel like, activities that we should be targeting. It's just for me that 12 months of FTE equivalent, which we haven't even seen yet how easy that's going to be to track or report. I mean, there is no like OrStar today that we've seen that does that. But that still feels high compared to like the other limits we're talking about. And sorry, I mean, and independent of the limits we're talking about, it feels high to me for a single organization to be contributing to a county candidate.
I think so. My point is most organizations won't contribute that level is the reality, because they don't contribute that level now, and they didn't previous to the limits. So you probably won't ever get that level from a single organization.
Right. So I guess, I mean, yeah, and I know you and I have talked about this a lot, Felisa, and I guess like this is the kind of difference in approach in my mind is like, in my mind, I want kind of a like limit that stops, an organization that is, hell bent on helping a single candidate win actually, hit that limit when other organizations are, based on their priorities, contributing 1/12 of that limit or, whatever it is. Like, it doesn't seem positive to me to set the limit like way above what we think organizations will use. That seems bad.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can keep talking about this. I feel like we're just not gonna, I mean, I think I am sort of to the point of like tracking and keeping track of and being consistent with the rules and the laws of all of these jurisdictions. I feel like there is consistency that needs to happen. And I do think that these organizations, I mean, to be frank, it is actually hard to track people's hours and stuff when they're doing door knocking and all of that. We do it. Organizations that do it and small organizations are able to do it. This language from the state also restricts, right? Like the restrictions on this language restricts much clearer the democracy building activities that we're talking about. much clearer restrictions. And it's also very clear to me that the Secretary of State is willing to enforce the rules that are consistent. There is no enforcement of the rules that are inconsistent by the Secretary of State's office. They've been crystal clear with that, about that to the city and the county. And, you know, like I said earlier, I'm sitting here like a dumbass because nobody was enforcing the rules of the city.
Yeah, that seems definitely like a big problem. I mean, I think maybe when we get to the enforcement section, maybe Felisa and James can be like the power tag team or something. In that, I do think having a complaint-driven system is dumb. I mean, if somebody is putting in things saying, "Hey, I spent this money on uses that were not allowable under the program," that should not require a complaint. You know, the administrators of the program should say, "Oh, I'm sorry, just to clarify, was that advertising? Because if so, that is not an eligible expenditure and we're not reimbursing, you know, or we're charging you back if we've already paid, or, you know, whatever it is." Like, complaint-driven system, yeah, just weaponizes the complaints, and it also is like much less likely to, you know, result in complete compliance. I mean, not that we'll necessarily ever have complete compliance, but it does feel like those things that we saw in that spreadsheet should not have required complaints.
And to be clear, like the city did, you know, was actively reviewing every single donation that was reported, and like would often email the campaigns and say, this might be a problem, you might have to refund this, or, you know, they might, and more often than not, they would actually ask for permission up front, which is something we always emphasize. Please ask us for clarity. And that way they kind of avoided the compliance issues too. And so it doesn't, you know, I don't want this to be perceived that like the city was like totally, you know, has hands tied the whole time. It was like leaning in on enforcement too.
I mean, looking at these complaints and the dates that they were given on, that does not seem to be the case. So either way, I feel like if we're trying to get to the issue, I feel like the crux of this conversation around in-kind is James is just to summarize and correct me if I'm wrong. You think the state definition is fine, except for the amount of FTE is too high.
Yeah,
Is that a good summary? Sorry.
Yeah, totally. And sorry, I kind of misstated it earlier, but yes, the way that the state has defined kind of the allowable types of activities seems good to me. Yes.
And I think that the state definition for clarity is fine. And Becca, what do you think?
I think certainly the state definition of allowable activity is preferable, honestly, to the city of Portland. And I'm fine with the limit. This is the stage where, you know, James, you've talked about this, is I would love to have some stakeholder and community engagement. I'm assuming that there were people involved in informing 4024, groups who engage. I know that there are folks who engaged in the in-kind part of the city of Portland who did not have a good experience. So I'd love to actually hear from other folks. But generally, I would be fine with the state's definition.
And just so
Go
I
ahead.
know that you all have balked before when I've thrown out numbers, but can somebody give me a number that you're thinking of today for 12-month FTE equivalent for, you know, somebody canvassing or somebody organizing volunteers or whatever?
Like a dollar amount number?
Yeah, rough. I mean, all included, so benefits and everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the dollar amount number would vary wildly, but probably between all in 60 to 120.
I mean, I think that seems right to me. I mean, and that seems like a huge amount of money when we're talking about $600.
I think canvassing is really expensive. And I don't actually think that we should pay people shit to do that work. So I think it's really hard I mean, we've all done it. Everybody on this committee has done it, and it is very labor intensive. It is very hard. And all of those activities are very much, I also think the reality is I don't want to encourage people to hire people at lower wages and benefits to skirt a Multnomah County law. The cost is the cost, frankly. I just feel like none of these laws address the cost of things.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely a problem. I mean, having a specific dollar amount that then, you know, the incentive is in the wrong direction to decrease wages or whatever. But I mean, yeah, having like three, you know, I mean, I don't know like how folks would organize it if they were going to try to like max out on this. My guess is it would probably be like 3 people for 4 months or something. And that's just like a tremendous amount of, you know, effort and money for a county race, to the point where like I mean, you know, obviously everything would change under this system, but like under the old system, I kind of wonder if you could have bought a Multnomah County seat for that kind of money, like having 3 or 4 people working full time on it for like the end of the election. That was a lot more than I saw from like many of the winning campaigns in the past. But I mean, you know, it's hard to know how that would change. And obviously there's becoming more interest in the Multnomah County offices too. So I don't know. But it seems like a lot compared both to like historically what's been given, and also, you know, just if there were some kind of system where we're kind of limiting the amount of donations that can come from all other sources, but this ability to like, you know, have a bunch of people working full time is something that, you know, can be given out by endorsing organizations. It feels like the endorsing organizations have like, you know, really high degree of influence over candidates, as we talked about last time. Go ahead, Lisa.
So I hear you. I don't agree with you. And there's nothing that you're going to say that's going to change my mind on this. Like, I'm really not, I just don't, I'm not going to reach agreement on I feel strongly enough that it's not. So I don't know how to be more articulate about that. Like, and I'm not hearing a proposal from you in a different way. So I think the question to me is like, what do we do now? We are not going to reach consensus on this because I'm not in agreement. I'm not in agreement with the premise of most of what you just outlined, first of all. So, and then the second part of it is I'm not in agreement on the lowering of the FTE. Not because I don't think it probably could be lowered for these candidates, but the tracking of it and the amount of mistakes that will be made, it doesn't seem worth it to me.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
I guess
So I guess I'm kind of fine sticking with the $106 situation we got now.
$106.
Or the however much it is. I forget what our current in-kind limit is now.
Okay, I see.
So
Well,
I just
you
feel
know,
like I feel like I think that you're trying to facilitate us to consensus here, Dane.
Right.
And I just want to be like very transparent that we do not have consensus.
yeah. So I
So
think,
what do we do?
yeah, great question. So I think, you know, we have 2 choices here. Choice 1 is we maybe find some time to see if there's a way of compromising and finding a middle ground. Because I also agree. I don't think like we're gonna totally like join. You know, I think both sides have like different philosophical takes on this. So I think like, do we want to try to find time to like reach a middle ground, or the second option is, you know, when the subcommittee wants to make a recommendation, it could just do it based on a majority process. And, you know, what our practice is going to be is if there is a division and there's not consensus, then we'll have like a report, like a kind of a majority minority report, where both sides kind of offer a very quick synthesis of like where they feel for the full committee to make the decision. So I guess that's a question for you all is, at a later date, do you all want to do a majority minority vote, or do you all want to try to schedule some time later to find the middle ground?
I
Okay,
feel
sorry,
like the challenge on the, and I wouldn't use the term middle ground, but if we wanted to continue to be in conversation to get to consensus, it would entertain us building out a system and approach that's totally different than an existing one now, and I'm not interested in that. I just, again, I've said repeatedly around clarity and ease of understanding and participation that it's important to align it to an existing or soon to be coming online.
So I'm recalling when we had our first subcommittee meeting that I thought that, Felisa, that you said at that point that you would be fine adhering to either of the existing systems, the city or the state. And so I guess it sounds like now your kind of position has moved away from that. Or maybe I'm misremembering or misunderstood where things were before. But if consistency is the top goal, and I agree, like I want folks to be able to understand the systems. Obviously I'm much more comfortable with like the nominal limits at the city, but those are dollar based, so it has the other problems. But of course I'm completely on board with like the activities as defined at the state level. So I feel like we have consensus there.
Yeah, I feel like I've gotten 2 additional pieces of information since our first meeting. One is the piece of information that, as predicted, nobody participates for the most part in the city's in-kind conversation, or if they do, it's very nominal because of how challenging and misunderstanding the rules are. And 2, apparently everybody's just following the rules. Like, so I'm fine with the system if I thought it worked, and now I have a set of information that everybody's been flouting the rules.
Can I add another piece to that based on my understanding of activity in 2024? The in-kind limits of small donor in Portland were hard to comply with, unclear, and also a moving target, right? There's like rumors they're going to up it, which led to folks not doing democracy activities with the candidate. And I mean, it pushes people to do like paid field on the IE side, right? And so if one of the tenets that we are moving forward is, participatory democracy, accountability with electeds, which relies on, relationships between member organizations and the public, that the way the city of Portland currently does in kind, I think will result in more democracy building activities happening in the IE space. And I'd much prefer that happening in coordination, transparency, and accountability with the candidate.
So my understanding of why folks weren't participating in the in-kind stuff at the city was that it was like really limited who could do it. So I mean, isn't that like kind of apples to oranges for what we're talking about for Multnomah County?
I'll say for the city, there was
No.
a number of complicated rules, and also on top of that, there was this whole thing about directly provided versus indirectly provided, which added like a complete different level of complication to the process too. So like, I will say it was more often than not, we heard concerns and input about the rules being complicated than we did about the limits being too low. Yeah, Felisa.
I also want to be transparent. Like, we've participated under not just the last election, but multiple elections under the city's voter-owned election program The rules around direct in-kind support where you work with candidates have always been complicated. So when you're counting direct democracy building activities, how do you calculate the number? Right? That changed a couple of times, or there was a discussion about it changing in the middle of the election. So not this last election, but the previous election. So do you count your doors knocked? Do you count your contacts? If you count your contacts, do you use the market rate? Are you required to use the actual rate? If you use the actual rate, what is that? Like, this is why the conversation around the FTE at the state level, we've never been able to figure out the in-kind rules at the city ever and comply with the law. Because and I want to say again, like I don't feel like we are probably one of the most sophisticated political organizations in the state. And if we can't figure it out how to comply with the law, like I'm not and we probably knock on more doors than any other organization in the state. And we can't figure out how to do those activities and count correctly. And, so I think that so I don't know how you do that if you're in a Pono, or I don't know how you do that if you're the Urban League or if you're Community of Color Coalition.
Can I just step in
So
here?
Lisa,
Actually, I'm sorry. Can I just step in here and say we have 3 minutes left? And, I think there's a question about consensus versus, I won't use the term middle ground, but consensus versus like majority vote. And also, I want to spend some time talking about exclusions because the state law has certain things that are excluded from in-kind donations. And I think that's definitely worth the conversation. So are people open to meeting next week to have a conversation about that, about those 2 pieces too?
No, I don't actually think we do need to have a conversation about exclusions. I feel like the folks on this call are clear. We've read the state law. I think the issue fundamentally comes down to James's point where we don't have agreement is about the amount. So if we're going to have a conversation next week, I would like to focus on the thing that we don't have agreement on, as opposed to having a conversation on all of the other things that we have an agreement on.
Okay, yeah, I think then in that case, if we hold that meeting, I would ask people like review the chart carefully and like note any things that you feel are, if we're replicating the state law, do note anything that you think you'd like to talk about in greater detail. But yeah, noting that, do we have time, or can we like take the last few minutes here to schedule the next week's meeting?
I can, but I wonder, Daniel, if you would also mind drafting kind of the things that you think. I mean, so, there's not agreement yet on the amount, but like the rest of it that you understand that we have agreement on, can you draft that into a format that we can review to determine if that is what we want to send to the full IAC?
Yeah, totally. Great idea. Okay. So what do people look like for next week? I will note next Monday is the IAC meeting, the full IAC meeting. I'd rather note we not meet then. But if that's the only time, that's fine.
Wednesday is really good for me if that works. Otherwise, Friday after about 11. So really good. But if none of that's good, just Felisa, tell me what works for you and I'll try to make it.
I actually have an executive board retreat that went Thursday. I have a lobby day Wednesday and an executive board retreat Thursday, Friday. So I basically have Tuesday that I have any time, but I could do the week after.
Tuesday, I have 11 to 1. Although, 11 noon, I guess, is actually kind of my only window on Tuesday.
That works for me on Tuesday between 11 and noon.
I can do, I'm sorry, you end at noon or you end at 1, James?
I said originally 1, but actually noon is much, much better for me.
I'm sorry, because I can meet basically from any time after noon until 4 o'clock.
And James, you're saying that you have to end at noon, is that right?
Yeah.
Can we just
We're
look at
gonna-
the following week?
Yeah.
The following week on like March 4th, I'm basically, I can move almost anything March 4th.
Could we do 2 p.m.?
And I can move almost anything March 6th too.
2 p.m. on March 4th work. The 6th is
4th
also
is-
really good for me.
The 6th is not awesome for me. So the 4th is like deceptively wide open right now. So
2
I'm
2
so
p.m. on
sorry.
March 4th works great for me.
Okay, perfect.
I'm
I
sorry,
gotta, I
well-
gotta run to another meeting, so sorry to.
I'm sorry, Felisa, just what time did you say, Felisa? On
2
the 4th?
p.m. on March 4th works great for me.
Okay.
The 10 just
Thank-
go.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
I'll send out a
everybody.
calendar invite and a recap.
thank you.
All right, thanks everybody. Take care.